So we've got this great model that actually shows, rather than showing the lobes, this model shows functional regions of the brain, which is kind of cool. It shows the somatic sensory cortex around the top here, and it shows just anterior to that, it shows the primary motor cortex, okay, and all that good stuff. So, cerebrum, of course, is all of this. Okay.
Cerebral hemispheres.
Cerebral hemisphere is, since this is the frontal lobe, and how would I know that this is the frontal lobe? Well, the primary motor cortex is anterior to the somatic sensory cortex, so that's one way you could figure it out. Another way is by knowing that the cerebellum's in the back. Okay, so.
Gyri.
Okay, the gyri are the little ridges. And let me get out my little pointer here. And the sulci, which is plural of sulcus, are the little valleys. So there's a sulcus and there's a gyrus.
Longitudinal fissure.
Longitudinal fissure.
Frontal lobes.
Okay, well, frontal lobes would be up here, wouldn't they? Anything, the whole business in front of the central sulcus, which is right there. Okay, the central sulcus is in between the primary motor cortex and the somatic sensory cortex. So the central sulcus divides the frontal lobes from the parietal lobes.
Would you want central fissure instead of central sulcus?
Central sulcus is fine,
Okay,
okay, or central fissure is fine,
that's the next one. Okay. Occipital lobe.
okay? And there's no clear delineation of the occipital lobes, but they're back here. I'm showing primary visual cortex and visual association area, which are in the occipital lobes. So the way this is set up is it shows more of the functional areas, tries to show both.
Parietal lobes. Parietal lobes. Yeah.
Okay, parietal lobes are posterior to the frontal lobes, so they're right back there.
Temporal lobes.
Temporal lobes are down here on both sides, and they're quite separate. You can see the sylvian fissure, which separates the parietal lobes from the temporal lobes.
Corpus callosum.
Okay, corpus callosum, to see that. So I just put this together, now we'll take it apart. The hard part is getting a hold of this thing. Without it going flying. Yeah, exactly. Okay, now we see all the stuff inside, and it's very nicely shown.
Corpus callosum.
Oh yes, corpus callosum. And so this is the front, the anterior part, and this is the posterior part back here. And so this is the corpus callosum, and the anterior part is the genu of the corpus callosum, and that's the splenium of the corpus callosum. Okay.
Basal nuclei.
Basal nuclei, let's see here. So if I take this off, then the whole central part comes out. And what I've got is brainstem along with some other stuff, okay? And you're looking at the posterior aspect of the brainstem, and you're only looking at half of it. So there are two of the four bumps right there, two of the corpora quadrigemina, and the basal nuclei are, this whole part up here is the thalamus, and there would be one on the other side, okay, the two thalami, and just lateral to the thalamus is the basal nuclei, and the medial one is the caudate nucleus, and the lateral one is the lentiform nucleus. Very few models show that. What?
Can you turn it?
Yeah, caudate nucleus, lentiform nucleus.
Diencephalon.
The diencephalon is both the thalamus and the hypothalamus. So all of this up here is thalamus, and this little bit down here. So this is anterior, and so this is cerebellum back here, and so we have thalamus and hypothalamus. Let's remember, make up the diencephalon. And dangling off of the hypothalamus is the pituitary or hypophysis. And right here we see one of the mammillary bodies. Remember those two little mammillary bodies? And those are lab words as well.
Yep.
And this little thing you see right here, this little circle right there that has a little 47 on it, is the interthalamic adhesion. And since I wrote it on the board, you will see that again sometime.
What number is that? 47?
There's a little 47 on it.
Brainstem.
Okay, brainstem,
Cerebral peduncles.
cerebral peduncles are this big bundle of motor fibers that coming out of the cerebrum, right there.
Pons.
And the pons,
Medulla oblongata.
medulla oblongata down here, and running down the front side of the medulla oblongata is the pyramidal tracts, which the pyramidal tracts are an extension of the cerebral peduncles, which come out of the primary motor cortex. They are the motor fibers that come out of the primary motor cortex, and they manifest as big bundles of nerve tracts that you can actually see coming out, and then you see them again here, and then they finally wind up becoming the corticospinal tracts down in the cord that connect to all the skeletal muscles. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, is a disease of the corticospinal tracts. Results in paralysis.
Midbrain.
Okay, midbrain, you don't see much of it because it's covered up by the cerebral peduncles. About all you see is back here of the corpora quadrigemina. Okay, and we only see two of them here because we're only looking at half of the brainstem. Okay.
Cerebellum.
Cerebellum. Okay.
Vermis of the
The
cerebellum.
vermis doesn't show up very well on this one, but I was over digging around over there, and we've got this other brain. If I can just find the other half, there it is. So the cerebellum is in this gaudy green color, and is this? Let's see here. So, if you look at this, okay, here are the two halves of the cerebellum, and this part in the middle is the vermis. Okay, the part in the middle that looks like a little worm, remember vermis is the Latin word for worm. Okay.
Tentorium cerebelli.
And the tentorium cerebelli is shown beautifully on the half head. I just noticed a couple of years ago, you see the tentorium cerebelli running over the top of the cerebellum. Okay. A little double fold of meninges there, separating the cerebellum from the cerebrum. Okay.
Now we're going to move on to the ventricles.
Okay, the ventricles, and we've got this great little model, which is just awesome. This is actual size, just about. Remember, these are fluid-filled cavities. They're not solid structures in your brain, but they have very elaborate anatomy, and as you can see, so pretty cool. And there's this little hole in the third ventricle right there. And what do we call that hole? That's actually tissue passing through there, isn't it?
The trigone?
The interthalamic adhesion that holds the two halves of the thalamus together goes through there. Pretty cool.
Frontal horn?
Okay, so the frontal horns, okay, and there we have the occipital horns, and then we have the temporal horns that come way inferiorly and anteriorly. And remember that slice we were looking at through the cerebrum, where you could actually see both the lateral ventricles up here, then the little bit of the temporal horn of the lateral ventricle down below. And it's hard to see, visualize how they could be part of the same fluid-filled cavity, but you see from this that they are. That slice was just, that coronal slice was just about right through there.
Okay, so the choroid plexus?
Oh yes, and then the trigone is where all the horns come together. Okay.
The choroid plexus?
The little red guys in there are supposed to denote choroid plexuses. And the choroid plexuses reside in usually all of the ventricles, but it's variable from person to person.
Arachnoid villi?
Okay, arachnoid villi show up, these little red dots. This is this big vessel called the superior sagittal sinus that drains blood from the brain, okay? And the arachnoid villi, those little red dots are supposed to represent arachnoid villi in the superior sagittal sinus. We'll learn that one later, not yet. But arachnoid villi is a lab word for this time.
Lateral ventricles?
Okay, lateral ventricles, of course, are over there. We learned all the parts of them.
Septum pellucidum?
Septum pellucidum, I just about have to show you a picture. Lateral ventricles aren't shown as coming very close together, but this region where they come, my nose has been itching. The place where they come closest together is the septum pellucidum. But I think it's better shown in a picture.
Third ventricle?
Third ventricle is this one down here.
Fourth ventricle?
Fourth ventricle is down there.
Cerebral aqueduct?
Cerebral aqueduct connects the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle.
Foramina of Monroe?
Foramina of Monroe, there are two of them, and they're those little channels that connect the lateral ventricles to the third ventricle. So remember, I have that one quiz question what is the order of circulation of cerebrospinal fluid through the ventricles? And it circulates from the lateral ventricles, foramina of Monroe, third ventricle, cerebral aqueduct, fourth ventricle. And then the fourth ventricle has these little apertures that drain out into the subarachnoid spaces, those cisterns, okay? And any cerebrospinal fluid that doesn't drain out into the cisterns winds up in the central canal of the cord.
Meninges?
The meninges, well, about as close as I'm gonna come is calling this the dura mater. Well, no, I can't really do that either because this is blood out here. So I'm just gonna have to call this meninges collectively. And I don't think I have a model that shows the three layers.
Yeah.
If you find a model that does, let me know.
Didn't we have them?
I thought we had one last year.
Did I have one last year?
Is this one showing?
Let's have a look. No. Yeah, it seems to me like I had something too, but, yeah,
Oh, wait.
but it couldn't be on that one. I wonder if any of the torso models have it. Oh, yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
I knew we had something.
Yeah, my students always save the day. So, here we see Duramater. Okay, here we see arachnoid. And then there's a significant space, the subarachnoid space, and what do we find in there? Cerebrospinal fluid, okay? And then finally adhering tightly to the surface of the central nervous system, we have the pia mater, shown beautifully in this model. Thanks a lot. Okay,
So then we're gonna go to, the nerves, cranial nerves.
okay, cranial nerves. So we already did those,
Right.
and I won't ask you any cranial nerves on the next week's quiz, which won't be for 2 weeks.
Wrong one.
Now you know that Monday's a holiday, okay? And that when we come in here, we're gonna the next time we'll meet, we'll be in here, only in our heads, we'll be in lecture. Okay?
So we won't be doing this lab until.
We won't be doing this lab until 2 weeks from today.
Okay.
Okay, no class Monday.
No class
Then we
Monday.
have, lecture classes.
And we'll meet Wednesday and have a lecture quiz.
Lecture.
Quiz 2.
You know I hate this.
No lab quiz next week.
Okay.
It
so-
kind of is confusing.
Yeah.
So you get used to it, because we haven't done we've had a holiday sort of, or, yeah, we had Veterans Day, sort of messed us up a little. Well, but this is different,
Yeah.
because that holiday was on a Wednesday, and this holiday's on a Monday.
Okay, so we're gonna go to the spinal cord now.
Okay, spinal cord, well, my goodness.
Conus medullaris.
Okay, so the conus medullaris actually shows up quite nicely on here. Right coming down, it's hard to see. I don't have my glasses on because I just took them off. But you can just see where the cord ends in this pointy little place right there. And it shows quite nicely as the conus medullaris. And then all the rest of this is the cauda equina. And each one of those little filaments exits out through some foramen and becomes a spinal nerve. Either a sacral nerve or a lumbar nerve. Okay, and remember all those holes in the sacrum, both front and back? That's a lot of holes. But of course, this is a lot of filaments. Remember I told you the story about sucking one of those filaments up in a syringe.
Phylum terminal.
Phylum terminal, well, you kind of got to use your imagination to see it on here. I could describe it verbally, sort of point to where it is.
So now we're gonna go for the spinal
And
nerves.
the phylum terminal is made out of connective tissue. It's really an extension of the pia mater. The pia mater just continues off the end of the conus medullaris. Okay, it just continues down as a little strand of connective tissue and attaches to the coccyx. Okay.
So we're gonna go for the spinal nerves now?
The what?
Spinal nerves?
Spinal nerves.
Yes. Cervical nerves?
Cervical nerves are up here, and they're numbered C1 through C8. And then their thoracic nerves are numbered T1 through T12. And you've seen those designations on some of my slides. You saw L1 through L5. And as they come out of the cord, that's the kind of names they have. But typically those names change at some point. In many cases, those spinal nerves come back together in an aggregation known as a plexus. Okay? And there are 4 major nerve plexuses, some of which show up on models. And then once the nerves exit out of the plexus, then they have names that we will learn in lab, in our next lab. We'll be learning names like axillary nerve and musculos something or other nerve that I forget right now, but all the ulnar nerve and the radial nerve and the median nerve down here and the brachial nerve and all those. And in the leg we have the sciatic nerve gives way to the femoral nerve and the tibial nerve and all those named nerves.
Lumbar nerve,
Okay, and so the lumbar nerves come out of the lumbar vertebrae, and the sacral nerves, of course, those nerves really were part of the cauda equina, weren't they? Okay.
and then the coccygeal nerve.
Coccygeal nerve, I think there's some debate over whether there's one or two of those.
So how would you ask those if you had them on a quiz?
With difficulty.
I don't think.
Yeah.
Nerve plexuses, what's that?
Nerve plexuses now, I've searched far and wide to actually find a couple of them. And we can see over here, there used to be, maybe you've seen it, a big long yellow chunk.
Oh, yeah, what happened to that?
I don't know what happened to that, but that is the brachial plexus
I'll find it.
down here. And it was over there just laying on the counter. I couldn't find it. But this is just what's left of the brachial plexus, and it got broken off. And over here, we can see quite a bit of course, the moment you see the spine start to curve back like that, you know you're in the sacrum. Okay? And so these are a bunch of sacral nerves coming together to form the sacral plexus. And this is just what's left of the lumbar plexus up here. This is L4 and L5. So,
I don't think we have anything to say.
yeah, and that's the femoral nerve and all kinds of cool stuff that we'll be learning. But now you start to notice that the nerves are shown on these arms and legs as well. And we'll be learning the names of all those.
The cervical plexus?
Oh, you got something over there? Oh, well, yeah, maybe we've got something. Yeah, well, here's obviously is the cervical nerves. Okay, thanks. So we see all of them quite nicely, and we see pons, and we even see a trigeminal nerve sticking out of the side of the pons there. So.
That's it.
That's it?
That's it?
That's it.
Piece of cake.